1991, communism falls in old Yugoslavia. 1992, the war explodes in Bosnia. The Serbs controls more than half the territory. An ethnic cleansing of Muslims were performed through extermination. Between 20,000 and 50,000 women raped to reach a large Serbia. The balance, with 2 million people disappeared, 100,000 people died. This is how Europe would get to know the most bloody, painful, and atrocious events after the Second World War, with these concentration camps perpetrated on their ground. 27 years have elapsed since the confrontation between brothers, and it is hard to remember. The military conflict remained frozen, and we ask, is Bosnia-Herzegovina is an unexploited mile, as those that are under their ground and threaten 15% of their population. What is the view of Europe, United States, China, Russia, and Turkey? Bosnia-Herzegovina, the most cruel war after the Second World War. We will look at events, actors involved with your eyes. The political structure of Bosnia-Herzegovina is quite complex and is part of the legacy of war. Bosnia-Herzegovina presented its candidacy to the European Union and also NATO, something that the United States is supporting. The European Union should be the goal of Bosnia-Herzegovina. The first meeting with my colleagues, I will ask that the European Union institutions, as naive as it may seem, grant Bosnia the status of candidate as soon as possible to create a new dynamic. I am convinced that the future of Bosnia-Herzegovina is in the European Union. Both are guarantors of security and a citizen. The elites here for many years have been operating only in elections. This is something that subordinates our lives, our European future. Games of power that could endanger the implementation of the peace agreement, frustration, insatisfaction, ethnocentric policy. All this affects the long-term goals of the country, such as European integration. The United States supports the decision of the government of Bosnia and Herzegovina being a member of NATO. This is what I told them in my meeting with the three presidents today, and we did not support any attempt at separation. The United States will always be firm against any threat to the stability of this country. Let's place Bosnia-Herzegovina the most ethnical diversity. Bosnia-Herzegovina, or just Bosnia, located in the Europe. It borders with Croatia, Serbia, Montenegro, and the Adriatic Sea, 30 kilometers away. Before Socialist Republic of Bosnia-Herzegovina, one of the 6 federal unions members of Yugoslavia after the First World War. In 1992, it became independent, and immediately came the cruel Bosnia War that lasted 3 years and ended with signatures of Dayton agreements in 1995. They left a tutorage by High Command of the European Union, and there is no date foreseen to recover full sovereignty. It has around 4.5 million inhabitants. It has a federal decentralized structure divided in 2 entities, the Federation of Bosnia-Herzegovina and the Republic of Srpska. The first 51% and the second 39%. Bosnia is located in the southern seas, 4/5 of the countries, while Herzegovina next next to Croatia and Montenegro, occupies the rest in the south. This was traditionally populated by a Croatian majority and Serbian on the east. Srpska, that did not suffer the worst consequences of the war, is officially part of the country with such a big autonomy that it borders being an independent state. They are willing to adhere to Serbia ethnically and politically, and they have tried to make a referendum on independence. The capital of Bosnia Herzegovina is Mostar. Its main economic activities are carbon, iron, cobalt, and other minerals. It also has sheep, trees, agriculture, cereal, tobacco, fruits, and vegetables. They also have metallurgic, chemical and textile metallurgic, and hydroelectric energy significantly. Before the Balkan Wars, Yugoslavia was a group of ethnic groups with a clear heterogeneity. This is the only country of Europe member of the group of 77 plus China. On October 8, 2018, this publication was made in Catalonia. The National Forces won in the elections of Bosnia-Herzegovina. It had elections the day before, and this process was marked by irregularities reported and an illegal political process that put in doubt the candidates and the winning election. The three-party presidency rotated every 8 months, one per each ethnic group that was acknowledged. The Muslim Croatian Federation and the Serbian Republic. After votes were counted, Dodik of Independent Social Democrats won with 54.06% of votes. As new Muslim representative, he was elected, Safarovic was elected with 37.7%, while in Croatia, Komšić won with 51.14% of votes. These are recent electoral data, around 6 months ago. Deutsche Welle published that minefields in Bosnia, the struggle against an invisible enemy. This is also part of the present day of Bosnia-Herzegovina after the war ended, and still more than 90 tons of explosive material and landmines are still under earth. The goal was that by this year, 2019, they would be eliminated. This legacy of war. Now they're talking about 2060, even if specialists do not really know when Bosnia will be a safe country in this sense. There are many mines, but more than 4% of the territory are planted with the landmines. 15% of the population is in risk and is the main reason for death in the country. There are farmers looking for income who work in territories full of mines and therefore are exposed. Since the end of the war, around 50 mine seekers have died and more than 50 have been wounded. A good part of the mine seekers struggled in different bands during the war. I'll go now to Orden Mundial, disintegration and cessation wars in Yugoslavia. This paragraph says, the article is written by Marcos Ferreira, degree in history, expert in the Balkans and the Caucasus, especially related to Yugoslavia and post-Yugoslavia. It says its population was composed 44% of Slav Muslims, 33% are Orthodox Serbians, and 17% Catholic Orthodox, so it was practically impossible to find homogenic areas. The people of Bosnia-Herzegovina were the most to lose with the disappearance of Yugoslavia that started in 1992. Serbian paramilitary troops with the support of the Army of the Republic of Srpska started cleaning ethnic groups of the eastern part of Bosnia that should remain under Serbian power. These are historical data that enable us to place in context our critical move. We will add now other data in this sense, for which we incorporate Edu Marin, our correspondent in Madrid, Spain. Greetings from Madrid. On April 6th, 26 years from the Bosnia Wars are remembered. Europe was not accustomed to see these kind of conflicts, and Bosnia did not expect it either. Several war episodes started in Slovenia, but Bosnia did not expect that it reached its country, and much less Sarajevo. But this conflict left more than 100,000 people dead, 2 million people disappeared, and more than 8,000 Muslims murdered by the army under General Mladic. December 1995, they reached a peace agreement, Dayton agreements, that ended this conflict, where NATO participated, and also United Nations, which role was highly criticized, and that has not served much up to date, because Bosnia-Herzegovina is immersed in a sociological and political chaos, and much of the blame is given to the religious and political sphere that ended with the religious and ethnic hatred. This political and sociological chaos has prevented the European Union's dreams to annex this. This process is suspended now after the adhesion of Croatia and Slovenia, and Russia, Turkey, and China have growing interest in that zone. Thank you, Edu. Let's ask our guests after this pause what specific interests are there in Bosnia-Herzegovina. Edu Marin was talking about a political and sociological chaos. Who is interested in this? We'll make a pause and we'll be back. Herzegovina, the cruelest war in the Balkans. Western Balkans is a specialized media. European Western Balkans is a specialized media on the area, and this was published 2 days ago. PRIV leads an initiative to monitor the system of the state of law in Bosnia and Herzegovina. The European Commission launched a new initiative to watch over the state of law in this country, from entities in charge of assuring compliance with law to the courts. The idea will be to follow up and evaluate the amendments to the state of law and increase accountability in the state chain institutions. The author also says that they respect fully respecting the independence of the judicial power. Sputnik on journal on November 30th, 1 month after elections, said Russia calls to deliver authorities of Bosnia and Herzegovina the country's total control. We are convinced of successful performance of the country is only possible through effectively applying the balanced system of counterweights established by the Dayton Agreements 1995, oriented to an independent solution without foreign interference to seek for consensual decisions. These were declarations made by the spokeswoman of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Russia, Maria Zakharova. This in relation to the presence of the representative for Bosnia-Herzegovina, who says that the possibilities has been exhausted. Around 25 years ago, approximately, the wars that separated Yugoslavia started around 25 years ago. First came the Six-Day War, the Macedonia War, in the midst of Croatia, Bosnia-Herzegovina, and Kosovo War. All these would become independent states after the disappearance of Yugoslavia. Today, Balkans are the scenario of geopolitical disputes. We will see some news and then our guests. But Russia seeks to have influence in Bosnia and good part of the Balkans through its energy capacity. Both in Bosnia and Serbia, it controls almost the entire oil and gas market. In the first country, Russia is the only supplier of natural gas and controls the oil refineries through state companies. At the same time, Bosnia is being pressed to follow the road of the European Union. After elections held on October 7, the Council for Foreign Matters of this country hope that the Bosnian Herzegovina authorities make necessary reforms to follow the European road. The Srpska, the republic where the majority of Serbia, Bosnia lives, are willing to stay with Russia and against NATO. This have a politician that has very good relations with Putin and has relations in the Balkans. Sefak Saferovic, who was also elected president in the three-party elected presidency, proposed something completely different, saying that Bosnia-Herzegovina needs stability, economic reforms, internal integration, and also added that Bosnia should have a stable environment and should direct efforts to integrate to the European Union and NATO. I now invite and thank Iñaki Gil de San Vicente, Vasca intellectual, and Pedro Ortega, international analyst and president of the Study Center for Peace in Barcelona, both from Spain. Thank you very much. Iñaki, I start with you. Let's go again to history. I would like to ask how this cruel water came out. Was it a sequel of the Second World War? Yugoslavia entered in the end of the 80s in a very strong economic decomposition and its federal state because there were two countries, Croatia and Slovenia, the two most powerful parts of Yugoslavia, and they were were remaining behind. The economic crisis of the 80s left Yugoslavia literally in ruins, and this, together with the fall of the USSR, facilitated the interference of NATO's policy, especially Germany and the United States, to create internal tensions that exploded, as we all know. Upon then, a series of conflicts took place, and the most important to analyze what is happening now was the 2.5 months of the Belgrado bombarding in a policy of systematic lies by NATO and most of the European peninsula, especially Germany, with an information that was biased to United States and Germany about what was happening to Bosnia-Herzegovina, Belgrade, etc., and the deliberate bombarding by the United States against the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. This reflects the three great blocks of external tensions to Herzegovina that are pressing at these times. One is Russia, that notices that since the 19th century or even before, Europe has always tried to control the Balkans for a series of reasons we cannot talk about right now, while the Tsars and the Soviet Union later also wanted to keep control of the Balkans. And this second, the Silk Route that is strategically addressed by China with Russia's unconditional support is expanding to that area. And third, the internal contradictions inside Europe with Europe and the United States that does not have any good eyes on how these countries are starting to have relations with Russia and China. This is why I have referred to the deliberate bombarding by the United States of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade that caused 3 deaths, and this was in 1999, and that opened the entire cycle of preparation of a political, economic, and military aggression against China, and the preparation of the atmosphere that 20 years later we are having today. This war of destruction of Yugoslavia, taking advantage of its internal contradictions, facilitated international chaos we are confronting at this time. Thank you, Iñaki. I will now ask Pereira Ortega. According to our statements in the beginning, what about the Dayton agreements? Are they enough? Are there shortages, or what is the origin of them? Where the Dayton agreements, even if they have brought peace to the region, in their time were disastrous because they imposed the rules in which all the powers participated. With this, I want to say that they imposed a solution that was unrealistic for the population, especially if we're talking about the conflict 1995-1997 Bosnia-Herzegovina. They propitiated an internal division, and in practice there are no political or commercial relations between Serbia, Bosnia, and the Bosnian sector, and in practice this means that Bosnia-Herzegovina continues to be divided. And if you stroll around there, as I've done, I've witnessed in practice. So we cannot be happy. Besides, in Sarajevo, there is one of the main military bases of the United States. With this, I do not want to excuse Russia from the conflict because both powers played their own cards. It was higher in the First and Second War, where all European powers had alliances with the different republics and in Yugoslavia. Germany had with Croatia and Slovenia. France had with Serbia, and France, England had it also with Serbia. So each one played their own cards, and the price of war was strongly paid by the people. We must not forget the war criminals. Milosevic, who started this brutal war in Bosnia-Herzegovina and kept Sarajevo bombarded, and in the end, in view of the inaction of European countries, and all the European countries and the United States decided to intervene. And this is when NATO intervened, which is critical, but it was about liberating Sarajevo of a criminal attack that was made by Milosevic. Now, one of our Iñaki was explaining the background of this war, and he was talking about the lies of NATO. Something similar has said Pedro Ortega. I ask, what do you mean by this policy of lies? Because we understand that there is interest of making Bosnia-Herzegovina part of NATO. Well, we have a case. The Netherlands are investigating the passivity of the Dutch forces that, after deploying to the area, allowed impressive massacres and tolerated an extermination policy. Why? Because they had the order to generate situations that justify a humanitarian intervention. And we have seen what humanitarian interventions are. As in Venezuela, it was an invention to be applied in one of the first places against Yugoslavia. This happened in several parts of the long war of destruction of Venezuela, which I insist also was based on the internal decomposition. And all the crime of Kosovo was manipulated and concealed for the German population. They did not explain the deep interests and the relations that Germany had that had reunified 1 year ago and had promoted the separation of Croatia. It had armed Croatia, it had interfered in Slovenia, supported a series of lines, and even before the United States, the same happened in the Netherlands, Italy, and most of Spain, especially the European intellectuals that practically accepted the humanitarian intervention. Very few leftist intellectuals understood that the problem should have been analyzed from the logics of imperialism, revenge, and the U.S. Position with USSR. Nevertheless, European intellectuals legitimized Libya later, as it did with Libya and all bombardment. And once the United States and the West thought that it could pass to the second and last phase, the last phase was to destroy Serbia, it was a policy that was planned to the last detail. It was demonstration of advancing every minute, taking advantage of the weakness of many people, historic contradictions of Russia, and advancing in a line that was not designed but was sought for many years. And the people was completely to the margin of what was happening. Now we know dates that European passivity allowed many of those crimes which are overvalued. Thank you, Iñaki. I'll now ask Peri Ortega. Correspondent Edu Marin was saying that there's a present political and sociological chaos in Bosnia-Herzegovina. The ethnic religious differences persist. Is what happening only religious? And as in other places, for example, Middle East, are they using these struggles conveniently and such deep wounds of the war, or it does not apply here? I have listened to my peer Iñaki, and you have, I am talking of Bosnia-Herzegovina. 4 years later came the conflict of Kosovo that is different and has another context, although it is related. I will not talk about Kosovo. I share part of the reasons that my peer Iñaki has said, but not all, because yes, a brutal war was unchained by NATO and the United States on Yugoslavia when the Beijing embassy was bombarded and the Belgrade radio station, there were dead people, etc. Yes, it's true, it was a brutal war to end with the regime of Milosevic, but that did not end there. But it was a destructive war. But if we go back to Bosnia-Herzegovina, we must also say that Milosevic thought that Russia would support him, and this didn't happen in the Kosovo conflict. He expected this to unchain a world war with support of Russia, and Russia did not move a finger. But let's go back to Bosnia-Herzegovina. At this time, Bosnia-Herzegovina has asked the admittance to the European Union. It is they who have taken the step. Of course, the Republic of Sparta, since it is pro-Serbia and pro-Russia, does not wish that change. And I also understand that Putin, that also plays his cards in Europe and has tried and continues trying in diverse scenarios to unstabilize the European Union, because it also plays its cards as a great power. And the dispute it maintains with the United States regarding its allies in Europe has the European countries also play their roles. And these cards do not benefit the population of Bosnia-Herzegovina. What they need precisely is political stability, and they won't have it until such brutal division between Sparta and the zone of Muslim Bosnia persists, because there's no mutual recognition and each one plays its own letters. The ideal would be that Bosnia-Herzegovina reunite, eliminate this internal border with the Republic of Sparta, that it keep good relations with Russia, but also with the European Union to stabilize the internal situation, because somehow Bosnia and the Bosnian people must be allowed to overcome this terrible conflict it had with the ethnic division and confrontations, when in the past they lived fraternally completely well in the old Republic of Yugoslavia. And I would wish the same for Kosovo, because it follows the same road you described as for Bosnia-Herzegovina, because they have Serbio-Kosovo minority that is also asking the segregation of more Albano-Kosovo, that I understand, because they are being repressed, but it doesn't. It won't lead to anything good in the future in Kosovo. But other than deepening the division and creating new conflicts, they have enough. Therefore, the road of distension must be sought. It's the only possible road, the negotiation, because there is no other solution for conflicts. I don't see anything by Europe, any goodwill by Europe or the United States, but I don't see it from Russia either. So you're not going to hear good words from me for Russia's foreign affairs. Iñaki, would like to ask you something. It seems a legacy of the war, and it's extremely complex structure. We don't understand how it works because we were looking in documentaries we consulted to prepare the space that 5 presidents, 4 vice presidents, 14 governments, equal number of parliaments, and more than 140 ministers cohabit with only 4.5 million inhabitants, where there was the attempt of the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia after the First World War that could have come out well. We cannot detail now why it didn't. For a time, it integrated all this polychromy of cultures and peoples, but unfortunately for those people, they play a geostrategic role of connection between the East and the West, and the European East and West as well. And this is the problem to understand geostrategic problems that have hit the peoples, and how we have to have a long-term vision to see internal and external forces. I agree with my peer in the fact that there are no interests in the United States, Europe and Russia in finding a definite balance, and we must say it harshly and sincerely. The destination of these people at this time is full of contradictions, the same as in Europe, and it is the great powers that are planning the solution. How these peoples can reach an agreement, I think that this could only be reached with a socialist society that tried to rebuild based on criteria of equality, collective property, and respect to cultures. Although this already was discussed in 1905, 1906. This is my personal interpretation, but just to propose or make a reflection, I think that at present the sector that is most interested in reaching peace, or at least not to expand conflicts or radicalize conflicts, are Russia and China, for a very simple reason, because the strategic plan of China with the support of Russia is a long-term plan trying not to create armed conflicts with Europe, and less yet with the United States, because they know that for many time they don't have the military power to confront a policy of a response of the United States. Its policy is mid and long term, and especially to stop the United States in creating tensions in Europe and the United States. Those tensions are there for the time being. Tensions between Germany and the United States were seen after the trip to China and Europe, and Chinese president stay in China and Italy. This policy lets us know that these Russia-China blocs are not interested in making contradictions more acute, and the United States is more interested in conflict, not only to take Bosnia-Herzegovina to NATO, and expand NATO the furthest possible in order to hit Moscow and the Russian industry at any time. This is why I think that the forces that are more interested in a peaceful solution is Russia and China. Thank you, Iñaki. Although positions are a little different, I would like to ask Pere if Europe wants to control the Balkans, yes or no, and why? I agree with a good part with what my peer Iñaki has said. I agree. Russia and China are the least interested in seeking for confrontations, especially military confrontations, and politically with the United States. Now, they weave their influence networks, that is true. There are great powers, and those influence networks try to counteract against the presence and expansion of NATO. We must think that Macedonia just asked the admittance in NATO, and NATO is studying it. And perhaps it will, or I would say surely admit it. Bosnia-Herzegovina has not asked for the immediate. Yes, the European Union, but not NATO. Now, another thing I forgot before, in Kosovo, United States has the largest military base of Europe, the largest. So it didn't only make war, but it established there and built, as my peer Iñaki said, established it to stop the Silk Route and control a geostrategic zone, which are the Balkans. This is critical, of course, but I also have to say that in this geostrategy, Putin's Russia is also playing the cards, I would say, aggressively. I think the term is correct because the INF agreement, which is that it is true Donald Trump has broken, has immediately answered by Putin with a unilateral rupture of the INF. And this was based under the umbrella of terror, which is that no missiles could be installed in Europe, neither in the east or the west of Russia or Europe, that would solve a military confrontation on European soil. This is an agreement that satisfied us and was signed in its day by Gorbachev and Ronald Reagan, and now it has been fractured by both parties. And therefore, we are at danger here, a threat of a possible return of a Cold War, which is worse, a nuclear war in Europe. We hope that both powers, and Russia is also responsible here, do not play with that game of a nuclear race, because if any Russian missile is addressed to European soil, the European countries would feel threatened, and I'm thinking of countries of the European East that are members of NATO and are favorable to NATO at the time where NATO is in a deep crisis. They are meeting in Washington now to try to somehow Mr. Trump does not abandon NATO because it has threatened to abandon it on several occasions. And at this time, what we shouldn't wish is that the confrontation between Russia and the United States be decided on European soil, because NATO is in crisis right now. We all know that European countries are starting a strictly European defense, PESCO, before the threat of the United States abandoning unexpectedly NATO. And therefore, It would be useless. Therefore, Europe is starting to walk in another way. This debate would be complex, but I want to summarize by saying that Russia and Europe must understand each other. The Cold War is over. There are common interests, commercial relations, economic relations, the dependence of Western Europe of Russian gas. All this leads them to understanding, not to confrontation. Although the United States does not wish that understanding, but we must all put our goodwill to mutual support and not make things worse, the internal conflicts, but seek to arrange those conflicts both in Bosnia-Herzegovina, Kosovo, and something we haven't discussed here, the Azov Sea, that also has a problem because the Azov Sea are international water, and therefore all have the rights to sail on international waters. We were talking about this yesterday. Thank you very much, Pere Iñaki, for your positions. Some not consistent, but very valuable for our audience. We had our guests here. Let's continue deepening or incorporate the vision of another analyst. What are the interests of the United States, Russia, Europe, and China? Consequences and geostrategic interests 27 years after the most cruel and longest war of the Balkans. We are back. Bosnia-Herzegovina, the longest and most cruel war in the Balkans after the Second World War. We are analyzing geopolitical interests. Are we on the verge of new wars? We contribute new elements and continue analyzing. After the war, tension between the nations of the Balkans has not stopped. The entrance of Macedonia in the NATO increased the possibility of an armed conflict. This country has border conflicts with Kosovo, Bosnia-Herzegovina. Kosovo seeks to recover almost 12,000 square kilometers from Bosnia, and Bosnia wants something else in return. Important oil reserves are also at stake. This is due because the army is composed by Serbian, Croats, and Bosnians. This, nevertheless, does not leave aside the important purchases of weapons between Bosnia and Croatia and 16,500 soldiers in Bosnia. Slovenia, member of NATO, has 7,600 soldiers, and Macedonia 8,000. I introduce our next analyst from the United States. This is Joseph Malouf, a political analyst and attorney. Thank you very much for having us. Is there, as in many other geographic spaces, interest of the powers in this country? I'm not sure. I must say that the United States specifically has not shown to be very interested in Europe and international conflicts. This president only thinks in the United States, and I don't think that he understands the consequences of ignoring those conflicts, especially in Europe. What consequences do you think that may have? Of course, this is a problem, but we have to seek for a way in this country to support NATO and try to seek for a way where we can have more stability. I would ask you, what would the interest of Bosnia-Herzegovina to NATO mean? Our former guest Ortega said that it is in crisis. Yes, I think that this is a serious problem in the sense that I'm not sure it will be a positive change. I think that NATO is very weak. It needs to be stronger, and this president has done everything possible to weaken it. I don't think that will work. I'm not sure that the U.S. president will help to do it. What geopolitical consequences do you think result from the separation war of the ancient Yugoslavia and everything that happened in the Balkans? We still have much instability, violence, and I'm not sure that there's enough stability to be able to say that these conflicts remain in the past, including now that the International Court of Justice of war crimes found that a former president had a sentence of 40 years and life for genocide. You see that the country is still unstable, and especially Serbians consider that this is unfair, although we know that history has taught us that these conflicts always leave hundreds of thousands of dead. So I think that stability is not there. NATO is trying to do something, but I don't think it will reach a stable situation. These tensions continue. Thank you very much, Joseph, for making contact with us. We'll go to conclusions after the exchange with our guest. Yugoslavia, by the end of the 80s, started economic, political decomposition of its federal force, and upon there, several conflicts took place in the Balkans. Each power played its cards, including Russia, in the case of Bosnia-Herzegovina, that was the population that paid the brutal consequences of bombardments, and today it happens the same. There are no interest in finding a final balance, because the destination of these people move in the complex of contradictions of Europe as a whole. The great powers plan exits not always in favor of people. Stability, said our guest Iñaki, would depend on composing a socialist society to try to rebuild the criteria of collective property and respect to cultural diversity where ethnical religious disputes continue. There's an alert in the fact that several countries are asking Bosnia-Herzegovina to join NATO to the interests of the United States. There are also internal contradictions inside Europe and the differences between the community bloc and U.S. government. This is the end of our critical move. Thank you for being with us.